Laura Bennett was the kind of woman neighbors trusted with their spare keys, but behind her warm smile was a secret so cold it would take months to reveal, one that began with a bottle of eye drops and ended with her husband, Thomas, dead in. Their quiet suburban home, Laura Bennett's house, sat at the end of Willow Lane, a street lined with tidy front yards, painted fences, and driveways where children's bicycles leaned against garage doors. On most mornings, she could be seen walking to her car in her pale blue nurse's uniform, hair neatly pinned, a travel mug of coffee in her hand. People liked her. She had a way of making others feel comfortable. Her voice was soft, her smile warm, and she always remembered small details about the people she met. To the outside world, she and her husband, Thomas, had built a solid, enviable life. They'd been married for 12 years, had 2 school-aged children, and owned a home that looked like it belonged in a real estate ad. Thomas was a dependable man, the sort who woke early to mow the lawn before work and made sure the family car never ran low on gas. He worked at an accounting firm in town, the type of job that demanded long hours but gave them financial stability. At neighborhood barbecues, Thomas and Laura stood side by side, the picture of a well-matched couple. Friends often commented on how lucky they were to have each other. But what no one saw, what no one could see, was the slow shift happening inside their marriage, hidden behind polite greetings and cheerful updates. The first sign of trouble appeared in the spring. Thomas began coming home looking unusually tired. He blamed it on work, saying the tax season rush was wearing him out, but even after the busiest weeks passed, he still seemed drained. Laura, always attentive, made him tea and told him to rest. It was the kind of care that made everyone believe she was a devoted wife, but beneath her outward concern, her thoughts ran in different directions. She noticed the smallest changes. In him, how his hands trembled slightly when holding a coffee mug, how he sometimes paused mid-sentence as if searching for the right word, how his appetite faded bit by bit. Neighbors would later recall seeing Thomas looking pale on his morning walks to the car, moving a little slower than before. Some asked Laura if he was all right. She'd smile and explain that he was fighting off a stubborn virus, nothing serious. Her explanations sounded believable, even comforting. After all, she was a nurse. If she said it was nothing, why wouldn't they believe her? Weeks turned into months, and Thomas's health didn't improve. On certain mornings, he would skip breakfast altogether, holding his head in his hands as if the light in the kitchen was too bright. He lost weight, though not in a sudden, alarming way. It was gradual, the kind that could be blamed on stress or age. Through it all, Laura maintained the image of a steady, caring partner. She kept the house running smoothly, took the children to school, and even posted cheerful family photos online. From the outside, nothing about their life seemed unusual. Inside, however, the atmosphere in the Bennett home had shifted in ways no one else could sense. There was a quietness that lingered after the children went to bed, a heavy kind of silence that seemed to settle over the walls. Thomas often sat in the living room without turning on the television, staring at nothing in particular, while Laura moved through the house in calm, measured steps. The Bennett's friends had no reason to suspect that behind the closed curtains, a story was beginning that would one day make national headlines. The slow unraveling of Thomas's health, the hidden motives behind his wife's gentle smile, and the suburban street that would soon become a place reporters gathered with cameras, all of it was still invisible to anyone passing by. At that moment, it was simply another quiet day on Willow Lane, with Laura Bennett waving to a neighbor as she watered the flowers, her face lit by the late afternoon sun.by early summer. Thomas's decline could no longer be brushed aside as a lingering virus. His once energetic presence had faded into something almost ghost-like. The man who used to jog on weekends now struggled to climb the stairs without pausing to catch his breath. His skin had taken on a dull, greyish tone, and the brightness in his eyes seemed clouded by constant fatigue. He would wake in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, shivering under the blankets, and in the mornings, he often looked as though he hadn't slept at all. Still, Laura reassured anyone who asked that the doctors were working on finding the cause. She told the story so consistently, so convincingly, That no one thought to question IT to T work, Thomas's colleagues grew uneasy. They noticed he was slower to respond to emails, sometimes lost track of important details, and even made small errors in calculations, a mistake that was unthinkable for him in the past. One afternoon, he nearly fainted in the break room. When his co-workers urged him to see a specialist, he told them Laura already had appointments lined up. He spoke of her as his greatest support, explaining how she'd been by his side through every test and examination. Behind closed doors, however, Laura's attention to Thomas's health was far from what it appeared. She had developed a fascination with his symptoms, observing them closely, almost methodically. On the nights Thomas fell asleep early, she would sit at the kitchen table with her laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting off her glasses, reading about rare conditions and unexplained illnesses. Over time, her searches became more specific. She learned about certain over-the-counter products that contained chemicals which, if ingested in small amounts over time, could wreak havoc on the body without leaving obvious traces. At first, one name kept appearing in her searches: tetrahydrozoline. It was a common ingredient in eye drops used to reduce redness, harmless when used as intended, but dangerous, even deadly, when swallowed. According to medical articles she found, the chemical could cause dangerously low body temperature, slowed heartbeat, respiratory failure, and, with repeated exposure, organ damage that could lead to death. The symptoms aligned almost perfectly with what Thomas had been experiencing for months. In the kitchen cabinet where she kept medications for the family, new bottles of eye drops began to appear. They were not for anyone's eyes. They sat in plain sight, tucked between vitamin supplements and cough syrup, so ordinary that no one would give them a second glance. Every few weeks, she purchased more, each time paying in cash at different stores. As Thomas grew weaker, his reliance on Laura increased. She made his meals, brought him drinks, and insisted on managing his medication schedule. Her presence in his daily routine was constant, and he trusted her completely. Friends who visited saw nothing unusual, just a devoted wife caring for her sick husband. If anything, they admired her patience and strength. On social media, Laura began posting vague updates about his condition, carefully choosing her words to invite sympathy without revealing too much. She wrote about how hard it was to watch someone you love suffer, how the doctors were still searching for answers, and how she was staying strong for the kids. Each post gathered dozens of supportive comments, cementing her image as a woman enduring a heartbreaking struggle. No one outside their home could see the quiet calculation at work, the deliberate nature of each step she took. The change in Thomas's health was slow enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but steady enough to ensure there would be no recovery. While neighbors were busy with summer barbecues and vacation plans, the Bennett's home became the setting for something darker, a place where a dangerous secret was taking root behind the cheerful flowers in the front yard. And as July turned to August, the pace of Thomas's decline began to quicken, bringing him closer to a point from which he would never return. The evening of September 14th began like any other. The children were upstairs doing homework. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, and Laura was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Thomas had been unusually weak all day, moving slowly and speaking in short, strained sentences. He had skipped lunch entirely, claiming he couldn't stomach the thought of food. His face was pale, and a light sheen of sweat clung to his skin despite the mild temperature inside the house. By the time dinner was ready, he barely had the strength to sit at the table. Laura placed a glass of water in front of him, setting it down with a soft clink. She watched as he took a sip, his hand trembling slightly. He tried to force down a few bites of food but gave up quickly, pushing the plate away. She encouraged him to rest and assured him she would clean everything up. A short while later, he moved to the couch in the living room, lying down with a blanket pulled over him. His breathing was shallow, and his eyelids fluttered as though it took effort to keep them open. By 9 o'clock, the situation worsened. Thomas tried to stand but immediately staggered, clutching the arm of the couch for support. His knees buckled, and he sank to the floor. Laura dialed emergency services, her voice steady as she explained that her husband had suddenly collapsed. The operator gave instructions until paramedics arrived minutes later, carrying their equipment into the living room where Thomas lay motionless. They worked quickly, checking his vitals, administering oxygen, and loading him onto a stretcher. The hospital, doctors tried to stabilize him, but his condition deteriorated rapidly. The heart monitor beeped in irregular patterns, each sound growing further apart until a long, unbroken tone filled the room. Thomas Bennett was pronounced dead at 10:07 p.m. The attending physician listed the cause as sudden heart failure, noting his recent history of unexplained illness. There was no immediate reason to suspect anything else. News of his death spread quickly through the neighborhood. Friends and family were stunned, struggling to understand how a man who had seemed healthy just months earlier could be gone so suddenly. Laura's reaction only reinforced the belief that she was a devoted wife devastated by tragedy. She cried softly during phone calls, accepted casseroles from neighbors, and thanked visitors who stopped by to offer condolences. The funeral was held 3 days later at the local church, where Laura stood at the front, dressed in black, her eyes red from tears. She clutched a folded tissue in one hand and received mourners with quiet grace. In the weeks that followed, she kept herself busy. She sorted through Thomas's belongings, paid off outstanding bills, and began the process of filing for his life insurance claim. The payout, once approved, would cover their mortgage, clear the family's debts, and leave enough for a fresh start somewhere new. She spoke vaguely about moving closer to her sister in another city, explaining that the memories in the Brookside house might be too painful to live with. Outwardly, her life had shifted into a new stage, one marked by loss, but also by the practical steps of moving forward. Yet beneath the surface, there was an absence of the kind of disarray that grief often brings. The house remained perfectly tidy, the children's routines uninterrupted, the bills paid on time. There was no sign of the chaos that might come from losing the person who had shared her life for over a decade, and no one questioned it. To neighbors, Laura was simply strong in the face of heartbreak. To friends, she was the woman who had done everything possible to help her husband through his illness, only to lose him in the end. What they didn't know was that the events of that September night were the final act of something carefully planned, a plan that had unfolded slowly, quietly, and with a precision no one had thought to look for. The story of Thomas Bennett's death seemed closed, but the truth was only beginning to surface. It was Thomas's sister, Angela, who first felt something about his death didn't make sense. She had visited him often during his illness and couldn't shake the memory of how his health had spiraled without any clear diagnosis. Each time she asked about test results, Laura would give short, vague answers, brushing away concerns with reassurances that the doctors were still figuring it out. After the funeral, Angela's unease grew stronger. She replayed the months leading up to Thomas's death in her mind, the weight loss, the dizziness, the strange way he seemed sedated at times. Something about it gnawed at her, refusing to fade. 2 weeks after the funeral, Angela contacted the hospital and requested that a toxicology test be done on the tissue samples taken during Thomas's autopsy. She knew it was unusual, but her persistence paid off. The request was approved, and the samples were sent to a state lab for analysis. The results came back in early October, and they were far from ordinary. The report showed significant levels of tetrahydrozoline in Thomas's system, a chemical found in over-the-counter eye drops. In small amounts, it was harmless when used for its intended purpose, but the concentration in Thomas's body was lethal. It was not something that could have happened accidentally. The lab findings were shared with the local police, and an investigation quietly began. Detectives started by reviewing Thomas's medical records, noting the unexplained symptoms and the lack of improvement despite multiple treatments. The slow and steady progression of his illness matched known cases of tetrahydrozoline poisoning. From there, they dug into the Bennett's home life. Receipts obtained from various stores showed that Laura had purchased dozens of bottles of eye drops over the past year, far more than a household of 4 could reasonably need. Many of these purchases had been made in cash, often at different locations. Investigators then turned to Laura's digital footprint. Search histories recovered from her laptop revealed late-night queries about eye drop poisoning, tetrahydrozoline effects, and symptoms of poisoning over time. She had even saved articles detailing cases where the chemical had been used in criminal activity, including how it could mimic natural causes of death if administered gradually. The more evidence they gathered, the clearer the pattern became. Financial records added another layer to the case. Laura stood to gain a substantial life insurance payout, enough to pay off the family's debts and relocate comfortably. Detectives noted that she had started making inquiries about the policy months before Thomas's death. While life insurance was common for families, the timing raised questions, especially when paired with the other findings. Throughout October, police kept the investigation under wraps. They did not want Laura to suspect she was being watched. Undercover officers observed her daily routine, noting her calm demeanor and lack of visible grief. She continued posting occasional updates online, speaking about her plans for the future and thanking the community for their support. To those who knew her casually, she appeared to be slowly moving forward. Angela was quietly updated on the investigation but instructed not to confront Laura. The authorities wanted every piece of evidence in place before making their move. By late October, they had assembled a case strong enough to bring to the district attorney. It was a case built on receipts, search histories, chemical analysis, and the undeniable fact that Thomas Bennett had not died of natural causes. In the neighborhood of Brookside, life went on as normal. Leaves fell from the trees, children planned Halloween costumes, and front porches were decorated with pumpkins. Behind the scenes, however, detectives were preparing for the moment when Laura's carefully crafted facade would come crashing down. The woman everyone thought they knew was about to be unmasked as the architect of a slow and deliberate murder. On the morning of November 3rd, the quiet calm of Willow Lane was broken by the arrival of 2 unmarked police cars and a plain white van. The officers moved with deliberate precision, their footsteps crunching over the frosty grass as they approached the Bennett home. Laura had just sent the children off to school and was sipping her coffee in the kitchen when the knock came. It was firm, unmistakable, and when she opened the door, she was met by the sight of detectives holding a warrant. Without resistance, she was placed in handcuffs and escorted to one of the waiting vehicles. Neighbors peered through curtains and cracked doors, their morning routines interrupted by the sight of the well-known widow being driven away to the police station. Laura was led into an interview room, where investigators laid out the evidence. Piece by piece. Receipts from multiple stores showing repeated purchases of eye drops. Surveillance images capturing her buying them. Search histories from her laptop detailing the effects of tetrahydrozoline and instructions on how to administer it without detection. The toxicology report confirming lethal levels of the chemical in Thomas's body. And the life insurance documents that revealed her potential financial gain from his death. Each item built a picture too clear to ignore, and by the time they finished, there was no doubt in the investigators' minds about her guilt. The news of her arrest spread quickly. Local television stations interrupted regular programming with updates, and headlines appeared on news websites within hours. Brookside widow charged in husband's poisoning. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, interviewing shocked residents, who described Laura as kind, quiet, and devoted to her family. Some refused to believe the accusations, while others admitted that, in hindsight, her composure after Thomas's death had seemed strange. As the case moved to trial, the courtroom filled with members of the community, journalists, and a few strangers curious to see the woman accused of such a calculated crime. The prosecution laid out their case methodically, presenting the medical evidence, the financial motive, and the digital trail that revealed Laura's planning. Experts explained to the jury how tetrahydrozoline worked, how small doses over time could mimic the symptoms of a mysterious illness, and how it could ultimately cause death without leaving obvious signs. The defense attempted to paint Laura as a grieving wife being unfairly targeted, suggesting that the eye drops found in the home were for legitimate use and that the internet searches could be explained by her background as a nurse. But the combination of chemical evidence, purchase records, and her unusual spending habits after Thomas's death proved overwhelming. Angela testified, her voice steady as she described her brother's decline and the doubts that pushed her to request further testing. Her words carried weight with the jury, highlighting the role persistence played in uncovering the truth. Medical professionals took the stand to confirm that Thomas's symptoms matched those of prolonged tetrahydrozoline poisoning and that the levels found in his system could not have been accidental. After days of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached its verdict. Laura Bennett was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed little reaction as the sentence was read, her expression as calm as it had been the day she was arrested. Back on Willow Lane, the Bennett home stood quiet. The once neatly trimmed lawn grew uneven, and the windows stayed dark at night. Neighbors still spoke about the case in hushed tones, unable to reconcile the image of the friendly nurse with the reality of her crime. The story of Thomas Bennett's death became a lasting reminder that danger can hide in the most ordinary places, and that evil does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes, it comes in small, measured doses, slipped into a glass of water by the person you trust. Most,